I am the famous American, and I have a concept that I want to share with you that I've learned just from living 40 years on this planet and from managing 2 different YouTube channels. And that is that people are reluctant to admit, to acknowledge that general rules do exist. That's hard for a lot of people to accept. They don't want to feel like they're being told how things are going to be for them. Now, I'm all for exceptions to the rules. That's great. But something I've learned in life is you actually should want to gravitate toward knowing what the general rule is so that you don't have to have as much of a learning curve. One of my things I've always said is I would rather learn from other people's mistakes than to have to learn from my own. And general rules definitely help with that. So I want to provide an example going back to, like I said, a minute ago, that people are reluctant to admit that general rules exist. So I made a video quite recently. The video was called Choosing Gender Pronouns. Is it offensive to admit men and women think and speak differently? End quote. Now, in real life, that's a very simple question. There really shouldn't be any hesitation involved in answering that question. And I don't know if it's the translation on the internet that people have to, people love to try to prove each other wrong. They love to argue and debate and try to prove that the other person is wrong, ignorant, and or immoral. So maybe that's part of it. But it was so fascinating to me that in that video, in the comment section, it was hard for a lot of people just to give me a straight answer. They would write whole paragraphs talking about, making sure that people are treated equal and all this stuff. And what's interesting is, ask me what I actually believe about transgender people or people, in certain categories. What do I believe? I believe equal rights for everybody. Everyone deserves to be loved and treated with the same rules and laws in the world we live in. No one should be discriminated against. I don't care what you believe or what you believe about yourself or what your gender is. I don't care. You should be treated like a human being. That's it. There's nothing else for me to even say about that. Okay? But with that being said, I easily acknowledge that men and women think differently. Men and women speak differently, generally. Generally, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, men think a certain way and therefore they speak a certain way. And women do too. That's why there, are chick flicks. Women typically are more likely to want to watch a romantic comedy or a show like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. Meanwhile, there's a reason why men gravitate towards things like sports. Because we think differently and we speak differently. And you can watch ESPN, a sports network. It's people, even arguing and gossiping about sports, but it's still on sports. Meanwhile, if you're watching The View, it's women talking about other women and all this. It's definitely broken up by gender because we think and we speak differently. That being said, absolutely exceptions to the rules exist. Whether that means a person is gay, whether it just means that you're a guy that is really into women's talk shows and less about sports, or vice versa, or whatever it is. There's a reason that in the United States that the NBA is much more popular than the WNBA. And it's not because people care less about women. It's because largely how people gravitate towards certain gender ideas. Now, I'm talking about general rules here. Again, it's fascinating to me that people won't openly admit that men and women think differently and speak differently. We can see this in products. We can see this in what people buy and what entertainment people choose. We can easily see this. We can see this in books that have been written about how men and women think differently. And for married couples, when it's a man and a woman, how they need to better communicate with each other. I own many of these books. I've been married 13 years, and it's been very important that I read and studied those books, and I practiced the things that I learned. For example, in case you're not married to the opposite gender and you don't know this, men typically want to solve problems. So when their wife tells them about their day and all the things that apparently went wrong, the guy naturally wants to provide all the obvious solutions to that. But she doesn't want you to solve the problem. She wants you to listen and empathize and say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. That's got to be tough. That's what she wants, okay? But if another man came to me and started telling me all these problems, I would start helping him fix it, and he would appreciate that I would fix it. I don't talk about my problems unless I'm looking for a solution. Women in general are not necessarily that way, and that's not a bad thing, but it is a general rule. And I can provide plenty of examples on both ends. Now, in general, men do think differently than women, and they speak differently than women, and vice versa, in general. It's amazing to me that we live in a culture where we can't openly talk about that somehow becomes offensive to certain groups of people, or whatever, because people are choosing pronouns. Choose to be whatever you want to be. Whatever pronoun you want to be, it's all the same to me, and you deserve equal human rights. I do not want you to be discriminated. If anyone treats you badly, I want to see you helped and redeemed. That's what I want. But I would say, still, the general rule exists that men and women think and speak differently. And if we're talking about an exception to that, I feel that exception that we're talking about only reinforces that the general rule is true. Your comments belong right here.